Oh, any other comments before we move ahead? Okay. If anyone had any interesting revelations, always feel free to share them with us.
JJ, how am I? How do I sound?
You're still not very loud, but your
Okay.
face is sure big enough, though.
Because I'm trying to get closer to the microphone. Anyway, I am asking you, uh, did you still feel the inertia that you said a couple of weeks ago? Did you
Like I
still
say,
feel?
it's not nearly as bad as it was, as far as what I pick up. And it
Okay.
seemed like everybody in the group seemed a little lighter today, also, which is a good sign. So there's always somebody out there that has some major personal problems, but I'm talking about kind of the group as a whole here. So, okay, everybody, we'll move ahead then with the class. We're talking about the prisoners of the planet. Just to recap here, does anyone want to tell us what the prisoners of the planet mean? What does DK mean when he says that? I bet you Ed can tell us what that is. Where's Ed?
It's all of the life forms that are unenlightened, all those who live in illusion and darkness.
Yeah. And what's the main cause of what's the prison bars composed of?
The physical, the material world the spirit is trapped in.
It's a prison of the mind.
Yeah, all that is correct. In other words, anything that creates form or are like prison bars for us, and that can be on all kinds of levels. And he says here that we come down here, we created this prison, we started out in not knowing anything many lifetimes ago, and we started out in a very primitive situation where we didn't even realize there was a soul or spirit or anything besides the physical reality we found ourselves in, and we had to start from scratch. And so it was a prison that we didn't even know we were in prison at the time. But he says here that humans have made great strides over the centuries. And he says in the past couple thousand years, there have been some really good examples of people that have made strides in escaping from the prison. And he names several lives: Shakespeare, Isaac Newton, Leonardo da Vinci, Einstein, Saint Francis of Assisi. And then, of course, he mentions Christ and Buddha were the two great examples. So these individuals, he says, are people that were able to see through the prison walls a lot better than just average people. And then he tells us, look at the advances we made on a spiritual level in the past couple thousand years. And then he says, just imagine where we will be 5,000 years from now. So that's an interesting thing. I mean, look at the material advances we made just in 100 or 200 years. It's just been fantastic. It's too bad the spiritual advance hasn't coincided with the scientific advance, but we have made spiritual advance too. But and if we look 5,000 years in the future, if we are able to continue civilization, it's hard to imagine what life will be like for us on the physical basis. But for 5,000 years, imagine the spiritual. Oh, how'd that picture get behind us? Did you do that, Ed? I can't hear you.
I added a background to my picture.
Oh, that's pretty neat. Okay. Yeah. So anyway, just imagine. So let's imagine that. How will we be different spiritually 5,000 years from now? Let's ask Annie that question. What do you think, Annie? What's some of the differences spiritually going to be?
Well, probably we will be more telepathic than today. Maybe we don't have to use words as much. And
Yeah, DK talks about that. It's kind of hard to imagine us being telepathic and not needing words. He says we won't even need books in the far future. So if somebody, I guess, writes a book, what do they do? Just think a thought for them, and then we pick that up or something. So it's hard to imagine where that's going to go.
yep.
Yeah. What do you think, Ken? What do you see happening within 5,000 years, and how are things going to change in spiritual in relationships?
Oh, well, it's kind of like you were talking about, we didn't see the internet coming years ago. I think.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Nobody really saw the internet coming.
Yeah, so looking that far ahead, I don't think it'd be hard to imagine what it's going to be like for me.
Yeah, there's going to be a lot of surprises. A number of the gatherings I've taken people into the future, and one of the big things they emphasize that's going to be different is how we raise our children. That we're going to, from the time that they've conceived, we're going to put attention on focusing energy on them and making life a lot more conducive for progress from the time they're very young. And that's something I would imagine would really happen, that we'll put a lot of attention on.
That's something I've been thinking about, because I have one that's less than 3 years old, and so yeah, I remember reading the book Masters in the Path, and it talked about children, and I thought about that years before.
Yeah, and a lot more children are abused than people know about too. A lot of things happen that nobody talks about in the various families, and there's a lot of problems people have when they grow up that's related to when they were children. And I think we will be looking a lot into this, how to solve these problems, so we can make sure our children can grow up in a good atmosphere where they can avoid a lot of the problems that children have today. And fortunately, many people have grown up in really awkward circumstances and have been able to kind of put that behind them and move on, and other people haven't been able to. So it's difficult no matter what if people have problems as children. But it's funny, speaking of me being a kid, my parents were pretty much alcoholics, and when they went to a park or something, my babysitter was the family dog. And my dad would command that dog to watch me, and they'd go off and do their thing, whatever it was, and come back a couple hours later, that dog was still there, and he growled at anybody that came near me. So he was a pretty good babysitter, but I was probably lucky we had a really good dog. So anyway, that's just one point. But yeah, my parents weren't really responsible when I was young. But it did give me, as I grew up, it's probably good for me because they weren't very disciplinarian. They kind of let me do whatever I wanted. And so I grew up with quite a bit of freedom. But I also kind of had a craving for more discipline. That I noticed other kids' parents discipline them quite a bit, and I never got that very much. So I had to kind of come up with my own discipline. But so anyway, yeah, children. it's like many parents say there's really no handbook for it, raising the children correctly that's universally acknowledged as being the way to do it. So we will put a lot more attention on that. Also, 5,000 years from now, a lot more people will be connected to the soul. And so soul contact will be probably something that's, you talk about it now, people wonder, well, what's soul contact? But in the future, there'll probably be shows about it, produced, movies. It'll be a common thing to talk about as being one with the soul and connecting with afterlife. DK tells us that eventually we'll have inventions that will connect us to the spirit world, so we will actually be able to talk to people that have passed on. So imagine when that type of communication is just universally accepted. Boy, that'll change everything. The
I have one.
standard atheist will just be gone at that point. Yeah, Rick.
5,000 years from now, there will be a noticeable number of people that can just think a certain thought and levitate, fly off like Peter Pan.
Yeah, that's a possibility. There's some people teach that we have the ability to actually fly if we knew how to do it.
Yeah, and the secret to how to do it has already been written in a popular children's story.
Oh yeah.
Man.
Well, there's saints and different people in the past that have levitated and actually flown.
You mentioned Francis of Assisi. He was a known flyer.
Yeah, I think he was, wasn't he? If I remember right, he was one of them. And
but the trick is, as Peter Pan said, right, or was it Tinkerbell? The secret to flying is to think a certain kind of thoughts.
Okay.
I'll leave that to people to figure out what he said. What kind of thoughts?
Yeah. Interesting.
There was a magician on TV, David Blaine, a few years ago, demonstrated levitation.
Yeah, some of his magic, some of these magicians, not only Blaine but several others, are so fantastic. You wonder if they're doing real magic. You know, it'd be funny if they were doing real magic, but you never know.
It's only magic if you don't know where the smoke and mirrors are.
Yeah, other magicians say, no, they're not doing real magic. We know how the trick is done. But some magicians are so good that even other magicians sometimes wonder, well, I wonder how in the world he pulled that one off.
Many of the miracles that Jesus did.
Them, they call themselves illusionists, not magicians.
Yeah. Yeah, that's probably true.
Yeah, I think that's very true.
Yeah.
Even the miracles that Jesus did were only miracles because we didn't understand the scientific technology behind it, but he did.
Yeah. Yeah.
So they weren't miracles to him.
Okay, he asks his questions. Now, what are some of the forms or some of the prisons from which we need to escape? First of all, there's three main prisons for us, and that's in the physical, the astral emotional, and the mental. First of all, in the physical, what's the main prison we have in the physical?
Our bodies.
Right, our bodies. And actually, we escape about a third of our life. We spend being escaped from that. What do we call that?
Sleep.
Sleep, yeah. And the funny part about sleep, when you think about it, is that when you're asleep, you don't pay much attention to your physical body. You can have an ache or a pain, and it may bother you while you're awake. And when you go to sleep, you don't feel it anymore because you're actually away from your body. So that's the nice part about sleep. If you have some discomfort, is if you have a good sleep, you're away from your prison. So that prison doesn't affect you quite as much as when you are awake. Now, you're still connected to your body. So if somebody comes and shakes you or something, you'll still wake up. So you still have a link to your body. So you're not completely free. But during sleep, you're not as much in prison as when you're awake. And you know, there's nothing really better than a good sleep. If you have a really good sleep, you maybe wake up and don't remember anything that happened, but you do remember this one thing, is it felt really great. You know, if you have a really good sleep, you think, boy, that felt great. So now, why did it feel great when you can't even remember anything? So but you do have a sense of the time passed and that something went on during that sleep, but you just don't wake up with much of a memory about it. So anyway, that's interesting to think about if you want to think about what it is to escape from the physical prison. Is think of a really good sleep as being uh, uh, giving you an idea. Now, there's other prisons in the world of form, like the material things that we all desire. These create prisons for us because they keep our minds focused on the material world, getting what we want of a material nature, and it takes away our attention from the spiritual. Now, the problem with attention is each of us only has so much of it, okay? So if we scatter our energies like a shotgun uh, does, then nothing, you don't have an impact, that much of an impact on any one area. You have to focus your attention like a laser beam so that you have a tremendous effect. And so this is a problem with the material world. There's so many things happening in this world to take our focus away from the higher spiritual realities. That makes it difficult to put the attention we need to escape this prison, because we find things in this prison that we like. We think we like more than the freedom of the spirit. And that's part of the reason we come down here. We realized this would happen to us, that we would get involved. But we volunteered to come into this prison to experience it, to see what we could learn from it. And then eventually, after we're here for a while and get uh, entrenched in it, then we have to work our way back. And this is where the people that are taking this course are at right now, is we're trying to figure out how to get back, because we've lived enough lifetimes that we've gained pretty much the things that we needed to gain in this material prison. Now we got to figure out how to return. A little bit like going into a jungle, finding new species and doing a bunch of investigation in this jungle, but then you forgot to make notes of how to get out, and you have to figure out how to get out of the jungle back to civilization. And that's a little bit corresponds to the situation where now we don't have the landmarks laid out exactly how to get back. We have to figure it out, and we have to get instructions from others that have returned so that they can help us to take the next steps to get out of this jungle that we find ourselves in. Okay, the second prison is the astral world, or the emotional world. How does the emotions create a prison for us?
Well, a
Well,
lot of it is like addictions, and addictions are sort of similar to a computer with a bunch of odd programs running in the background, and they think that they're real.
Yeah, addictions are more emotional than physical quite often. They do have a physical effect, but it's the emotional level is very powerful with addictions. That's a good point. Jill, you had a point?
Yeah, I was going to say, particularly when we're talking about the negative emotions, fear, anger, jealousy, greed, those things, particularly imprison certain people and are very challenging to break free from.
Yeah, yeah, especially hurt feelings type of thing where we hold grievances. They create the most powerful prison of all. And the Course in Miracles is really a good course to take to make a person aware of how important it is to release ourselves from grievances toward others. And so that's all these negative emotions create a prison that keeps us from moving ahead, even if we say overcome the material, so material things aren't that big of a deal. Emotional things can take their place. Now, how about on the plane of the mind? Where's the prison there? Okay, the key word there to contemplate is illusion. How can one be captured and held prisoner by an illusion? Can you give me an example?
We have erroneous beliefs and ideas that are conjured up out of the material world.
Yeah. Yeah, the religions are really good at this. They present a different belief system that if you believe in my version of Jesus, you will be saved. And that creates an illusion that takes them away from the true reality of the inner Christ. So, so anyway, there's, yeah.
My God's bigger than your God.
Yeah, as if we're not all under one God. Each religion has their own God and thinks their God is better than the other guy's God. And
all that does is create an attitude of separation, which is the greatest wall of all to break through, the wall of separation.
Yeah.
That I think is
now, DK tells us that through science as well as spiritual endeavor, we are removing limitations. That's interesting. He brings in science. So, how is science helping us to remove limitations? What do you think?
With our health, for one thing, the medical sciences are removing limitations.
Yeah. And how about computer science and the internet? What do you think? We haven't picked on Rulina. What do you think about that, Rulina?
What do I think about computer science?
Yeah, has the internet kind of helped remove some limitations?
Oh, definitely.
Like, look at us right here, right now, right?
Yeah, definitely. It's amazing that we can sit and here in our respective homes and meet from all over the world and talk and converse. And something that I noticed for some time now is that it's always seemed interesting to me that the new little kids that come into this world, it's like they already know how to do it. It's just instinctive. Whereas, you know, some of the older generation, they have that fear of the new. And so that's, I think, you know, that's a neat thing to see.
Yeah, I think I'm a pretty smart guy, but if I need something, if I get stuck on my computer with some problem, I ask my grandson to help me out, 12-year-old grandson. And he's a pretty smart kid. So it's amazing this how flexible they are at learning when they're young. And it's a lot harder for us older folks to learn something totally new. Whereas little kids, they just love new stuff. They just soak it up. So also DK tells us that science will be responsible for eventually making the breakthrough of how to communicate with the dead. So that'll certainly remove some limitations. And
I heard that Thomas Edison was working on something to communicate with the dead.
yeah, it's too bad he died before he got that perfected. He was a non-believer in regular churches, but he was really open to there being life after death, and he was working on that. But it's too bad he didn't live a little longer. He might have figured it out. DK says this. He says, in order to release the prisoners on the planet that come under the title of subhuman, he says, man has to work under the influence of the intuition. When working to release his fellow men and women, he has to know the meaning of elimination. So the prisoners of the planet, just not us guys, as we talked about last time, but the kingdom below us, and we are to be eventually the saviors of the animal kingdom, and we will stimulate the vegetable as well as the mineral. And but to work with the lower kingdoms, he says we use intuition, but to release our fellow men, we have to know the meaning of elimination. Now, he doesn't say you need to be eliminated yourself, because that's kind of a word associated with being close to a master. But you have to have an idea of what that would be. And elimination is basically where the person just instinctively knows what is light and truth. Instinctively just knows the answer. And so this person has to have a sense of knowing if he's going to help to stimulate his fellow man. So if that's what us as disciples need to develop, is this sense of knowing and feeling. Because for one thing, you can't help everybody. Some people are just where they are, and there's nothing you can do for them. That's where they want to be. And when you meet a person like this, the disciple should be sensitive enough to know, well, just let him be. That's where he is. Nothing I can do for him right now. And then you'll meet other people. You get a feeling about, well, maybe there's something I can do to shed a little light on things for this guy. And if you have that feeling, knowing about it, then there's a chance that you will be able to stimulate them. Now, Ed goes to senior citizens every week, and he talks to those guys. Do you get feelings about who you can talk to and who you can't, Ed?
Oh, for sure. Yes. You know, people that even when they have a certain presence about themselves and a certain way of being, that you know who you can communicate with.
Yeah. Yeah.
And another thing that I keep in mind, something I heard back from a group in the 80s, is Warner Earhart and Associates, and one of the facilitators used to say, I'm committed to your commitment. I'm committed to your commitment. In other words, you show me your commitment, and I'm committed to that.
Yeah, yeah. So anyway, you just never know. Ed finds people at the senior citizens he can talk a little metaphysics with, and I'm sure there's others that he gets a feeling that, I'll just talk about the weather with this guy. And so it's a funny thing about the weather, you can talk about the weather with anybody. But anyway, when he says, when the true nature of service is comprehended, it will be found it is an aspect of that divine energy which works always under the destroyer aspect, for it destroys the forms in order to release. This is interesting, that when we really stimulate our fellow man, we work with the destroyer aspect to an extent. What do we destroy in a person in order to move him forward spiritually. Let's pick on somebody here. Let's pick on Mindy. What do you think about that, Mindy?
What do we destroy in order to help someone move forward?
Yeah, in other words, if somebody moves forward spiritually, something is destroyed.
I would guess it'd probably be some of their limitations.
Right, their limitations. Would you say like wrong ideas are destroyed?
Yeah, wrong ideas and stuff like that. Glamours, illusions.
So think back to when you made some spiritual progress. Did you have to let go of some old ideas?
Probably. I'm sure I did.
Yeah. Of course, I think you were born enlightened anyway, so. But anyway, yeah. So that's an interesting concept he presents. Now, usually, kind of people think, well, if I'm going to enlighten this person, I'm going to build stuff. He says, not really. He says you have to destroy old thought forms. So if you are going to talk to like a regular born againer who thinks he's got the one and only way to God, you have to present him with ideas that will destroy certain wrong thoughts that he has, to bring him up to the idea that he has a higher self, he has a soul, and that soul represents the Christ that he's always tried to worship so strongly. So we destroy certain ideas in order to build new ideas. So that he says there's a destroyer aspect in this freeing of the prisoners of the planet. In other words, to free ourselves from a prison, the prison bars have to be destroyed. True service destroys prisons, brings liberation, and the disciple who rejects this, he says, will fail to perform his mission. Okay, so there's a lot of people that just are turned off by the idea of the destroyer aspect. He says, but if you're turned off by it, and if you just stand to just perfect peace and harmony at all times, and that's all there is, he says you're going to not fulfill the mission your soul has outlined for you. We have to be willing to break a few eggs in order to make an omelet, as they say. And and have you ever noticed that when you do present many people a step above where they are on a spiritual level, they will be very disturbed. Sometimes they'll even get angry. Anyone had that happen? I know Curtis has. What do you think, Curtis? Can you give me an answer, yes or no?
Yes. You right on. Well, you have to shatter old thought forms, and people get attached to their thought forms and beliefs and ideas, no matter how false they are. You know, when you teach a person that the world is not flat, they have to rethink their thinking. That requires a lot of effort.
Yeah, after you and I got together and I told you a bunch of stuff from DK and stuff, and you told your friend you went and lost some friends, didn't you?
I got about 6 letters from all my friends, especially when I was excommunicated, saying we'd like to be your friend, but we can't because you're an apostate and we cannot associate with apostates.
Yeah.
So that was it.
Yeah, this is why it's so important to realize that there's some people you can talk to and some people you can't. And when you first get a degree of enlightenment, you just want to talk to everybody, and it doesn't work out very good. You wind up just making a lot of people angry or fearful. Fear is a big item. I know a lot of people are just afraid to talk to anyone with a greater light than themselves because they're actually afraid of the truth. The truth is very fearful.
One problem that people have in hearing the truth is facing their own guilt, because inwardly they know but their own way of being doesn't demonstrate that. So they have to face their own guilt.
Yeah, yeah, guilt is a big, big problem. He says, the successful liberator will receive illumination, and he will be as a lighted lamp to reveal the way to others. He gives no rules or specific instructions for freeing the prisoner, but encourages all servants to develop the intuition and seek illumination and realize that they have an effect on all lives they contact, human, animal, and vegetable. And as we pointed out last week, now it's even mineral, because we were talking about the destroyer aspect. And what creates an atomic bomb is taking an atom, for instance, of uranium-235 and hitting it with a neutron, and it destroys it. It splits it right down the middle. And it releases a certain amount of pure energy. Now, DKs tells us this pure energy is pure spirit. And it's the breaking apart of the atom is a symbol of the breaking apart of the tomb of Christ where the resurrection took place. And the eternal life was able to escape, so to speak. And so the releasing of the Christ from the tomb, he says, is symbolic of the splitting of the atom. And he says the splitting of the atom was an initiation for matter itself. And so we, after he wrote this was in 1934, and then in 1945, we actually split the atom and reached clear down to the mineral kingdom as far as using the destroyer power to release some of the life force that's imprisoned in matter itself. And I guess the sun does this to a degree with nuclear fusion. It releases spiritual life through its energy producing process itself. Yeah,
that's represented by Shiva, the creator and the destroyer.
Right. That's like the father aspect. Curtis, you had something?
Yeah, that's a huge correspondence in the law of correspondences about shattering the tomb, opening the tomb, and releasing energy from the atom, the ADAM, ATOM. That's an amazing correspondence that you just brought.
Yeah, yeah. That's one of my favorite of all time. And so it's interesting. He says he gives no specific instructions for freeing the prisoners, and this kind of gives us the tone of all the teachings given through DK. Is he doesn't give a lot of specific instructions. He speaks around things, and he says he does this on purpose, that the people who read his works can see what he's saying if they will use the intuition. And so he says the true spiritual teacher, what he does, he doesn't just plunge right to the center of a truth, but he speaks around the truth and then lets the student see the core with his own thinking and intuition and imagination. And it's very frustrating for a lot of people. A lot of people just read him and just get very frustrated. Other people read him and just love him. But I will say this, that no matter who you are, when you first start reading him, it will be a little frustrating. So you need to just keep on reading. And one of the things that I read that really encouraged me, one of the early things I read, he made this statement that he says that, yeah, some people will have some difficulty in reading my works, But he says, don't worry about it. He says, if you feel you're not absorbing them, he says, keep plunging ahead. And then sooner or later, what I'm teaching will come to you, and it'll all start coming together. And I found that's not his exact wording, but that's basically what I got from what he said. And I found that to be really true. And so after I read that, I thought, well, I'm just going to plunge ahead, even if I don't understand this. And eventually I did start to understand. So it's his writings, even some of the really cryptic ones, even like quotes from the old commentary, which are very difficult to understand, they enter into the subconscious mind and filter up to the higher mind, and eventually it brings greater light to your whole sense of understanding. He says this: when large numbers of the sons of men can so act, then the human family will enter upon its destined work of planetary service. Its mission is to act as a bridge between the world of spirit and the world of material forms. All grades of matter, he says, meet in man. All states of consciousness are possible to him. Mankind can work in all directions and lift up the subhuman kingdoms to heaven and bring heaven down to earth. Nice words.
Well said.
And that ends Rule 12, finally through. And we'll begin next week on Rule 13. I'll just read Rule 13 so we can get an idea of what we're going to talk about. Don't have time to really go into it. Oh, before we do this, any more comments or questions on Rule 12?
Yeah, we were talking about science helping in our development, evolution. Yeah, that's perfectly true, because I have ISS Live app on my phone. I get to see people flying around the room almost on a daily basis.
Oh, really? I didn't know you could get an app on that.
The app is the International Space Station Live.
Huh.
And if they're doing a program or something like that, you get it right there. Or and they're always showing you, there's like a split picture. The top is showing you where it is on the globe.
Do they show pictures of the Earth and everything too?
Well,
so
yeah.
Have you seen that the Earth is flat then?
It's not flat.
They did a survey of millennials and found out that 25% of them think the Earth is flat. I mean, this flat Earth theory is really getting out there. It's fantastic. That it's disturbing how many people are questioning that the world is a sphere. even though we got the space station up there that can take a picture of the round Earth anytime. Yeah, anyway.
It's like a 50-cent piece. You only see it from the flat side.
Yeah. So
but those people are flying around up in that thing. They just, if they want to get from here to there, they just pick their feet up and
yeah, the flat Earth people don't even think they're up there. They think that that's just something created by NASA in a some type of movie situation. But
if they didn't see it on TV, it's not true.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, a lot of the flat Earth thing is believed by a handful, is believed by non-religious, but about 90% of the flat earthers are really black and white believers, and they take things literally from the Bible, like the four corners of the earth it talks about. They think there's four actual corners and different things like this, and they take it just literally. And it talks about indicates there might be a dome on the earth or something like that. But they take these things literally, and if you take any teaching literally, no matter how good it is, even the words of Jesus himself, you're going to, if you don't have some sense of inward truth, you're going to interpret it incorrectly. Okay, we'll just briefly read Rule 13 and prepare our minds for next week here. The magician must recognize the four. Note in his work the shade of violet they evidence, and thus construct the shadow. When this is so, the shadow closes itself, and the four become the seven. I bet you Rick understands that perfectly, right, Rick?
Oh, now we're getting into the math again. Oh, speaking of math, in what, 10 days, the keys of knowledge will be 21 years old.
Really? Well, 3 times 7.
That's
an interesting number for us. Yeah. Well, we thought we'd be in maybe in the thousands or millions by now, but we never quite got there. But we are what we are, and
I
it's
think
a good.
it's over. We're over 2,000 now.
Yeah, that's true. Okay, so what the four he is dealing with the world of quaternaries, and we're going to talk about the various quaternaries, and then when it talks about the shadow close itself, he's going to be talking about precipitation of thought forms materializing in the physical world, and how that's going to manifest. So we'll go into that next week. And in the meantime, any comments or questions before we wrap it up?
In one sense, the four is our persona, and the four, when it's united with the triad, becomes the seven.
Okay, good comment, Ed. Any other comments?
Yeah, I read a book that said they chose 4 gospels in the New Testament out of many that they could have chosen, each one to represent the 4 corners of the world, because the world was known to be flat.
Oh, I've never heard that analogy before. Interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, for the Gospels being put together by the Roman Empire, it's amazing they have as much light in them as they do.
That's for sure. It's amazing they've survived the Dark Ages and the last 2,000 years, that there's as much truth in them, even though they've been corrupted and distorted and rewritten many times. There's still a lot of truth to be found.
Yeah, they took everything in them. They burned everything that referenced reincarnation, and they tried to eliminate a lot of esoteric truth, but they still have quite a bit of truth in them. Yeah. Especially the Beatitudes is good for just a common man. It helps to inspire him to do better, which at least that's a good thing. Okay, any other comments?
Yeah, I have a comment regarding atheists, but do you hear me well? Because if you don't hear me well, then I will not say it.
Yeah, go ahead and talk. You're not quite as loud as you should be, but we can hear you.
Okay, so you mentioned earlier that when we have communication with the spirit world, it will negate the belief of the atheists.
Yeah.
I beg to differ, because it will be a scientific discovery, and it will still be in the world of form. So it will have the scientific explanation, and atheists will prevail.
Yeah. Are you talking about the splitting of the atom?
No, I'm talking about communication with the spirit world.
Oh.
So, and the telepathy ability.
Oh.
All
okay.
these will be scientific discoveries. So the atheists will still have their say. And
Yeah,
they
we'll
will-
still have a lot of prisons to escape from even after 5,000 years.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
There won't be perfect liberation. We'll just make steps forward. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Any other comments?
Well, if you want to know about a limited world, just see the movie The Truman Show.
Yeah. Yeah, we're that was a good analogy for us to think about, all right. Okay. Anything else? Well, we're glad everybody showed up. And we will look forward to seeing you next week. Next week it will be Sunday at 10 a.m. Mountain Daylight Time. Might be, I don't know if the change, 2 more weeks we're going to have the change in the hour. But okay, next Sunday at 10 o'clock, we will see you. So signing off. See you guys next week.